Hi and welcome. This is our last in the work series sessions, and today we're going to be talking about data collection and fading. The last time we met, we talked about instructional strategies, those strategies that we can teach the students to help them learn how to do specific job tasks or to learn some behavioral skills that are related to that job. Today with data collection, we'll be looking at all of those pieces put together, but looking at what sort of data can we pull out of what the student is already doing that will tell us when we can start fading some of those instructional strategies or some of the other supports that we put in place. Before we get started though, let's look at our objectives for today. By the end of this presentation, we want you to know that what data is, what data collection is, and how it can help support students in work settings. Also, we would like for you to understand what to do with the data collection. Sometimes we get data and we're not really quite sure what to do with it. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And finally, to recognize the benefits and the tactics for fading supports, because really what we're looking at is moving towards independence. So if there are some supports we can fade, we'd like to be able to put that in place. Let's get started first with what is data collection? What does that mean? I think sometimes it's really intimidating when we think about data collection. It seems like it's going to be a lot of crunching numbers and math, but really it's a systematic process of just gathering observations and measurements. It's something that we do probably most days, either personally or professionally. Personally, some examples of data collection would be the little hash marks that you have maybe on a door frame that measure your children's heights through the years. That's data collection. And you can look at, gosh, how much have they grown through the years? Having a budget is a method of data collection. Charting your gas mileage in your car would be data collection. Those are all some things that we do, probably most in some way, shape, or form. Professionally, certainly, I know I did it a lot when I was teaching. I looked at behavioral statistics or data collection with my students to see how are they making progress with some of the behavioral interventions that I was doing with them. But also in job sites, certainly professionally, we look at what is the student doing? What's their production level? So those are just a few examples of data collection that might make it seem a little less intimidating. And why do we do data collection? It's really simple. What do you want to know? I mean, it's really pretty simple. How often, how long, what sort of production, their patterns of behavior, and collections on any actions that a student may have. This isn't necessarily directly towards work supports, but it is related towards transition. At one point, I wanted to find out, I was working with some portfolios and I wanted to see, the question I had was, how often are these portfolios being used? What sort of services are students having put in place through the use of the portfolios? So I just looked at the portfolios. I made a little data collection sheet. How many are being used? How many activities are being included? And then I just crunched those numbers at the end to see what was the percentage of students in a particular school that were using the portfolios. But I started with that question, what do I want to know? So it's pretty simple. It doesn't have to be complicated when we're talking about data collection. And it can be collected on any action. We can look at, like I said, patterns of behavior. Is the student getting better at getting to work on time? Is the student better prepared with their materials that they need for work? What about the actual work skills? Are they increasing their production rate? All of those are things that you can easily collect data on. We also want to look and see, is there task growth and workplace readiness? Are we seeing evidence of their progress, their skills and their strengths, and meeting the goals and objectives? We'll talk a little bit more about that task analysis that we've done in the past when we talked about in instructional strategies and in job task instruction. But really that's what's intended. Let's look at what are the skills the student needs to master for that particular job. And then we need to look over time at, are we seeing some growth as far as those job tasks are concerned and with their workplace readiness? Maybe the student is in a job placement where it's not going to be their permanent job placement, and it's not necessarily that we're looking more at their general workplace readiness. So are we seeing progress as far as maybe their response to supervision, to being on time, to being able to work with others? Those are all some things that we want to be able to measure and look at their growth. Data collection is also objective. I mean, really, you see it on a page and you're going to be able to communicate that to parents, to other teachers, to educators, to the business, to see where is the student's progress? Are they progressing the way we'd like to see them progress? It's impartial, it's unbiased, and really it paints a picture. Look, when we can look at how much a student has grown in a particular job task and in a particular job setting, and we start to see, wow, they're really becoming more independent because we're not having to support them on every step of that job and every step as they start their work and continue with their work. They're really moving towards independence. And that's evident when we're able to start to fade and when we're able to fade some of those supports. And Jacqueline will talk a lot more about fading. So we'll just mention that that's part of the big piece of data collection. Also looking at are the work supports that we've implemented, are they working? Are they effective? And then it indicates next steps. What's the next step on the student's journey as far as their work skills are concerned? Like I said before, it's uncomplicated. It's simple. It can be part of what you're already doing. Certainly, if you've already put a task analysis in place, that's very simple to continue looking at what prompts the student needs and to start gradually fading those prompts using your task analysis. You just ask, what do I want to know? And what questions do I need to ask in order to be able to answer whether the student is making progress? And then we look at the how. There are lots of different ways that you can collect that data. I've mentioned the task analysis before. Behavior rubrics, which you're probably already using with some of those students. Maybe they already have a behavior rubric that they're using in class or across their school settings. That would be very easy to adapt to use in a work setting because chances are you might see the same sort of behavior in a work setting that you see in the classroom. So use those tools that you're already using in the classroom that you know are working to collect data in the work site. Observations, evaluations, interviews. If you have some checklists that you might be using, certainly the interviews with a business partner, those are going to be a great way for you to be able to glean some information about the student's progress. Surveys and self-assessments. Self-assessments can be a really powerful tool for a student because it puts some of the data collection and some of the responsibility with them. An example, one of my colleagues works with a young lady who her job is virtual. And so in order to help her get ready for her day, she has a self-assessment that she goes through and she finds, did I get up on time? Did I take my medication? Am I dressed? Am I ready? Is my hair brushed or my teeth brushed? That's her self-assessment to help her get ready. It gives her, it's sort of a checklist. It is a checklist of tasks that she needs to do, but it also puts some of that in her court. And this is where the Google Suite can be a really, really powerful tool for you because those Google Forms, if you have them available to you or some other tool that like Google Forms, the self-assessment, you can go back and look at their answers and see how they're doing over a period of time. It really, it looks at the data for you. And then your simple charts. Just, is the student progressing through their day? Are they getting the big pieces done? So that really is in a nutshell, what it is, why we do it, and then a little bit of the how. And we're going to move on, and Jacqueline's going to talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of data collection and fading.
All right, thank you, Kendall. So now that you know the why and how of data collection, let's take some time to discuss the when and what of data collection. So Kendall spoke about different ways to collect data and how you do that. And I'm really going to focus on taking data on students' performance and behaviors while engaging in work-based learning or job opportunities. So when do you collect data on your students' tasks, performance, or behaviors on a job site? For task-related data, you want to collect data every time you're providing direct instruction, or even when you're just simply observing after the student has gained some independence in a specific task or part of the job. So from day one, you are on site taking that baseline data day one, so you know a student's current level of performance. Then you will continue to collect data each time you're with a student, even if you're just simply observing. So you can use that task analysis, like Kendall mentioned, to ensure that your data that you're taking is consistent, and it's just a simple way to capture that data on the task performance. So you will want to collect data on behavior when a specific behavior has been targeted for increase or decrease. So once a student has met a goal for the behavior, you don't need to continue to collect the data each time you're on site, but you would begin to collect behavior data again on a job site if there's a new behavior targeted for support. So when we think about when, it's really important to note that you only need to collect data when a student needs you to be there on site or with them to either provide support or some observation. So this means you don't need to stay around just to collect data. However, you might want to go back on site after a student has shown that they are independent and can, complete their tasks by themselves, if you want to conduct some assessment or gather current information. But otherwise, you don't need to stick around just to collect the data. And I think that's important. So we don't want to really be on the job site more than we need to be. So don't feel like you have to stay around just to collect that data. So collecting data is an important part of providing work supports. But we have to do something with that data we collect, right? So what do we do with it? You have all of this information, what can we do with it? So it's important to analyze that task and behavior data that you've been collecting. So when you're reviewing that data, make sure that you look for trends. So you might notice that a student works better with a specific coworker or during a specific time of day. And that data can also show you preferred tasks. So it can highlight things that really interest the student, that they're really engaged and excited to be doing. Now, you also want to look for gaps when you're analyzing the data. So what skills are the students not learning or not mastering? And what tasks does the student maybe actively avoid and not get done on a regular basis? So those things are really important to look at when you're analyzing data. And yes, some of these things you might be able to kind of deduce without data, but it's always good to have that data to back up your theory to make sure that you are on the right track. So when you take data over a period of time, so you're constantly taking it every time you're on site and you observe, you then can compare the current data, so that day or that week's data, with previous data to find areas of progression or regression. So sometimes progression is hard to identify in the day-to-day. It might look like students aren't making progress in their learning and development, but that's why having that black and white data that you're comparing and analyzing It will help you more easily identify where your student is growing, even if that growth is in small amounts. But you can also see if there's any regression. So picking up on task regression as soon as it starts happening is really critical to success, because you want to stop that regression from continuing. So when you're comparing and analyzing and you pick up on that regression, it really tells us we might need to go back in and provide some additional supports. And then you also, when analyzing the data, you want to look for mastery of tasks and responsibilities. So the data that you're collecting will confirm that a student knows how to complete a task independently, and then it shows you when you no longer need to be providing support for that specific task. So it's always important to know, and I've mentioned this before, we don't want to provide support when support is not needed. And so that data really tells us when we or specific support is no longer needed for that student. Okay, so at this point, you've analyzed the data, discovered some trends, gaps, seen progression or regression, and targeted areas that students have mastered. So now what? What do we do with all of that information? I want to talk about 3 ways you can use the data you've collected and the information gained from analyzing that data. 1, you can use the data to create interventions and inform instructional strategies. So once you've identified those gaps or areas of regression, you should implement some supports and interventions to help develop those areas. So we don't want to just see that there's gaps or regression and do nothing with it. We want to plan and implement some type of support to really help strengthen those areas and those gaps so students are continuing to develop in their skills. And don't forget to collect data on those interventions and instructional strategies to ensure that what you've implemented is effective. And then 2, you want to help use the data to help develop IEP transition goals. So this data really shows you where the students need to make some improvements, where they need to progress, what their interests are, what they are really excited about doing in that work-based learning opportunity or job, and what their strengths are. All of these things are really important to consider when developing transition-related goals. And something else that you can do with the data is to share that information with the student, the business, and other stakeholders to really highlight where the student is progressing. So at times, I've seen students get frustrated because they feel like they're really struggling to learn, or they're not doing as well as they think they should. So I'll take the data and that I collected. Sometimes I'll put it in a chart, depending on what the student's needs are, and I will show them where that they've made progress. And this really helps to continue to motivate them. So it's really important to include the student in that data collection process to ensure that they know that they're making progress, even if it feels small. And then employers also might struggle to see those small steps forward in progress, or maybe they're hesitant for you to fade from the student, and fading is something we'll talk about shortly. But if you have that data, you can show them that the student is actually making progress and pinpoint those areas of growth over time. And then you can also show them concretely that the student is actually independent in an area or a specific task. So it is actually okay for you to step back because the student has got it. Okay, so Kendall and I have both mentioned fading. And data collection is a critical part of determining when it is time to fade from a student. So we've mentioned before that the goal of all employment supports is to get students to not need your support any longer. So for them to become more independent. And fading is really the act of removing yourself from a task or a job, an area or the site completely to build that independence as a student masters their task. And fading is very important to overall independence and really should be built into our instructional plans and our data collection process. So now I want us to take a minute to listen to a colleague of ours, and she's going to discuss what is fading in terms of work supports and how might you do that on a job site.
For many, fading or leaving the job site after investing time with your student and the business is not all that easy. When training new staff, I hear all the time, "What if something happens once I fade from the job site?" Remember, just because you leave does not mean the student does not have support or supervision. The student is under the supervision of the business. Under general supervision, the student continues to receive instruction and support from his or her supervisor or coworkers. This is typical of all employees, and this is what we want to occur. I want to take a moment to define fading a bit more. When I talk about fading, I classify it into two different categories: proximity and time on site. When you fade proximity, you move away from the student, but not from the business. Job site training often begins with standing next to the student to provide the training and instruction of job tasks. As the student begins to increase independence with completing tasks, it's time to distance yourself from the student. Start with a couple of feet, then move across the room. The more the student increases independence, the further away you move. With proximity fading, eventually you will fade far enough away that the student does not notice you. This allows you to test how the student might perform when you fade off-site. The other type of fading is time on site. This simply means fading your physical presence from the job site. As the student begins to increase independence and you've identified chunks of time or tasks that the student does not consistently require prompts, you can begin fading from the job site. For example, I had a student who demonstrated independence with the majority of her work responsibilities after a few weeks of providing support. However, she still needed my support with completing her data entry responsibilities. This task was the last responsibility she had to complete prior to the end of her shift. Based on her level of independence, I was able to fade from the business the first 3 hours and come on site for the last hour of her shift to provide the needed support. At this point, you may be wondering, how do I know when to fade supports? The answer is embedded in the task analysis data. I often say, let the data do the talking. Deciding to fade is not a guessing game, but a sound instructional decision based upon data. Analyze the task analysis data. The data will guide you through the decision-making process of when to fade. Trends and chunks of mastery will alert you that it's time to start fading. Take the example that we just discussed about the student worker needing support only for data entry. I was able to make the decision to fade from the site for the first 3 hours because I analyzed the data and saw the chunks of time I was needed and not needed. As you are instructing and using data to make decisions, it's important to create a plan to set the goals for fading and an approximate timeline for reaching independence on the job site. The plan will guide the timing and amount of support you need to provide. This will greatly assist you in managing your time and student support needs. This plan can be especially important when planning your time if you support multiple students in different jobs across the campus. While you do not have to write out a formal fading plan, we highly suggest that you do. Creating a written document allows you to more concretely communicate the fading of supports to others. It also provides you with a visual to ensure you are on track with fading. In addition, a written plan is extremely helpful if there is more than one person supporting the student due to staff needs and absences. This will provide guidance to ensure the amount and type of support is consistent across support staff. Please keep in mind, the fading plan does not need to be lengthy or take a lot of time to create. It's a tool to assist the business, student, and support provider in laying a foundation for a successful employment outcome. Let's take some time to discuss the different components of a fading plan. First, you want to start with the justification of why it's an appropriate time to start fading. This justification will be based on task analysis data, observations, and interviews with students and supervisors. Discussing the justification with the student and supervisor will decrease concerns about fading from the job site. After the justification is written, outline a schedule of support. This schedule includes the number of hours you will be on site. It's important to outline the specific times you need to be on site. For example, your data may tell you that you need to be on site to provide support for an hour at the beginning of every shift and the last hour of the shift. After outlining a fading schedule, create a timeline for the upcoming weeks and months. This portion of the plan may also include the natural supports or strategies that will be utilized to achieve fading. After developing a fading plan, the next step is to communicate the plan with others. Fading only works when the student, support provider, and business are comfortable and on the same page. A supervisor may need a bit of reassurance that you can come back to the site if any problems arise. Give them your contact information and let them know that you are available as needed. Also, make sure the student knows how to get in contact with you. Fading works best with an open and honest line of communication. Once the fading plan has been shared and discussed, it's time to implement the plan. Like an instructional strategy, the fading process needs to be implemented and assessed. It's a good idea on the first day of fading from the site to check in with the student and supervisor on how it went at the end of the shift. After the first day, assess how the fading plan is going by soliciting feedback from supervisors and the student through check-ins and evaluations. Data should still be collected on tasks that you observe during your time on site to inform the fading process. If things are going well, then continue to move forward with the fading plan and gradually increase your time off-site until the student is working the entire shift independently. If things are not going well, then make adjustments. Shorten or change times in your plan or talk to natural supports about how they can support the student when staff is not present. Most of the time, small adjustments are enough to get the student back on track. Okay, so that was a lot of information. Let's recap how to successfully fade from a job site. First, use the data you're collecting to alert you when it's time to begin fading. Create a fading plan and include a timeline. Communicate the plan to others. Ensure the supervisor and student have your contact information in case something does not go as planned. Implement your plan. Begin by fading for periods at a time during the work shift. Follow up with coworkers or supervisors to ensure student performance is meeting expectations. Then, gradually increase your time off-site until the student is independent for the entire shift, which is the goal of job site training and supported employment.
Okay, so hopefully you've learned a lot from the video and now you're ready to start fading. But while fading is an important part of work support, as a school employee, you will want to keep some things in mind, and I just want to talk about those for a couple minutes. One, know your school and district policies. You might not actually be able to fade off-site completely. You may have to remain on site even if the student has mastered a task or their job due to school and district policies. So I encourage you, if you are unsure about the policies, talk to the teacher or administration about what their expectations are in the policies around fading. Also, as a work support that goes on site, you might not be responsible for making all of the fading plans and decisions. Talk with the teacher to discuss who will make decisions regarding data collection, fading, and then who will be responsible to implement those plans. Everyone has a different role to play, so just make sure that you're clear on what your role will be and the expectations of you in terms of data collection and fading decisions. And then a third thing to consider is if going out to a job site, collecting data and fading is all new to you and your team, maybe reach out to your CTE teachers get to know what they do and what their policies are for when CTE students engage in internship and work experiences. CTE teachers are really well versed in best practices and policies regarding students going out to work sites and internships. So leverage those relationships and that knowledge and just kind of check out to see what they do and if they have any suggestions for you when you're going out on a work site or internship with your students. So Kendall and I have tried to outline best practices when it comes to work support, but each school and district are going to be different in what they allow and what their expectations are. So make sure you do your homework and so that you're following all the guidelines and policies that your school district, your teacher has for you when you're out working with students. So thank you so much for joining us in our final video as we are talking about data collection and fading, which is a really critical part of work supports. And this is our final video in our work support series. So moving forward, if you have any questions regarding the content for this or any of our previous videos, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Again, thank you.